Hey, what is up everyone? In today's video, we are going to take a look at two ways to make our bubbles move. First, we'll look into ECS or Entity Component System. In this approach, we'll create a system to make the bubbles move. In the second approach, we'll be using RealityKit physics to make the bubbles move. This is a follow-up to my previous bubble shader tutorial. So I won't be creating a new project from scratch, but the concepts and ideas we'll be discussing here will pretty much apply to any RealityKit entities. If you are interested in how these bubbles were made, you can take a look at my previous tutorial where we go in depth about how the shader was made. My name is Sarang Borude, and I know a thing or two about making beautiful looking spatial computing apps. So let's figure out how we can make these bubbles move, shall we? So you can see that our bubbles are looking a little bit boring right now. They're not behaving like actual bubbles. They don't have any randomness to it. So let's just work on that. So first we'll try to instantiate the bubble at random position. Right. So let's first go into our Reality Composer Pro package. You can see our bubbles seen here. What we are going to do is we are going to delete all the copies of the bubbles because we don't need it anymore. Okay, so we know that we are in the bubble scene. Our bubble entity is called bubble. So we need to know the name of our bubble entity because we are going to find it here. So what we are going to do is we need to save this bubble. Let's create a state variable called bubble. Let's instantiate that as an entity. You can totally make this an optional. I am just doing it so it's simpler. So what we'll do is we'll find our bubble and store it here. So I'm going to use the find entity function, and we are going to pass the name bubble here. Okay, so it will probably give an error. I'm going to unsafely unwrap it right now, but you should properly use something like guardlet, make the bubble optional. Okay, so once we have this, we are not really adding this bubble to the scene. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to comment out this statement, content.add. We want to create multiple copies of this bubble. So let's create a for loop. And let's say we are going to make 20 copies of it. And then we are going to use the clone function for an entity. So what we're going to do is we want to create this bubble, and then we are going to do clone. Let's make it recursive. So our bubble doesn't really have any children, but if your entities have any children, then you should set the recursive flag to true. Let's store it in some variable. All right, so we have our copy of the bubble clone that we're going to instantiate. So what we are going to do is going to set its position to some random values. So let's try to come up with that. Now that we have created a copy, assigned it a position, now what we are going to do is we are going to simply say content.add, and we are going to pass it the bubble clone. So we are not passing the bubble that we found. We create copies of it and we are adding that to the content at random positions. So let's run it. So you can see that our bubbles are now spawning at different places. Now what we are going to do is going to add some movement to them. So our first approach that we're going to take is we are going to create an entity component system. Let's just first jump into Reality Composer Pro. And on the bubble, we are going to add a component called bubble, and we are going to create a new component here. Let's call it bubble. So the reason we need to create and add this bubble component is basically we are using to tell the system that any entity that has the bubble component, you're supposed to act on that particular entity. We are going to save the scene, and we are going to look at the bubble component script. So you can see this, if you look into the packages in the RealityKit content, the code for the component is actually in the sources RealityKit content, and this is our bubble component. So this is what our component code looks like. There is a variable in it. We don't really need it, so we are going to get rid of this, and we are going to create another variable. Let's call it direction. We need the direction variable to give some initial direction to the bubble. We are going to make it a SIMD3 float and initialize it to be 0, 0, 0, 0. Now what we are going to do is give it some random value when the bubble gets cloned. So let's quickly look at what's happening. We set a direction variable here, and we set its initial value to be 0, 0, 0. What happens is when we look into the code and when we are creating the clone of the bubble, the component and its values get copied. So now what we have to do is randomize the direction after the cloning happens. First, let's get access to the component. So we are finding on our bubble clone entity the bubble component. After we have found that, what we are going to do is bubble component dot direction. We are going to set it to random float values between -1 and 1. So right, once we have set the value, we are going to assign it back. So we randomize the direction after creating the copy of the bubble, and then we set it back. Now what we'll do is we'll try to create a system that basically moves the bubble. So what we are going to do is we are going to create a new empty file. We are going to call it the bubble system, and we are going to make it a class. I'm going to call it bubble system. We are going to conform to the system protocol. So our file doesn't know yet where system comes for, so we want to import RealityKit and import RealityKit content. All right, so now Xcode complains that bubble system doesn't conform to the protocol, so let's fix this by adding the protocol stubs. We are not going to use the init method, but if you want to do anything on the initialization of the system, you can totally do that, like setting initial variables or something. But there is this method called update that kind of updates each frame. This is what we are going to use to update our bubble positions. So what we are going to do in our system is basically find the bubble entities and simply add or simply change their positions. And once we change their positions every frame, you can see over time it animates as the frames progress. So let's do that. So to find our bubble entities in the scene, we are going to do context.scene.perform query. So it's looking for an entity query. So let's do that. We are going to create a query, and this is going to be entity query. Entity query takes a query predicate, so let's create has, and this is where it tells what should the entity have. So we are saying any entity that has the bubble component we want to find that, right? So we are going to pass that here, and now what we are going to do is it gives us all the bubbles, bubble entities. So we will create this. Let's just call this variable bubble. So this is of the type entity. Once we have found this, now we are going to first find the direction of in which the bubble moves, and basically add a speed to it, some factor, and then make it move. So let's do that. So godlet bubble component, and then we are going to set the bubble's position. So position, we are going to add to the position of the bubble. So we are not assigning directly. What we are going to do, we are going to change. So we are going to increment each frame. So that's why I'm using plus equals here. So bubble position plus equals, let's do bubble component dot direction, and we can do times some kind of like speed. So we'll have to create this constant. So private let speed, it's of type float, make it really slow, like 0.001 to start with. You can play around with the speed, and that should basically do it. So let's run this. All right, so bubbles are still not moving. What is exactly happening? I can tell you what's happening. So we created our system, but we did not register our system. What we need to do is register our system. So there are multiple places you can do it. You can do it here in your reality view. One practice that Apple kind of recommends is, I have seen that they kind of do it in the abstract. So what I'm going to do is going to simply call init, and what I'm going to simply call is bubble system dot register system. So it's a static method here. If you run it now after registering, you can see that our bubbles are actually moving. So if you want more granular control in how the bubbles should move, if you want to create your own physics somehow, this is the approach you should take. So this was the first way of doing things. RealityKit directly offers you a second way, which is essentially using the built-in physics of RealityKit. So let's now take a look into that. All right, so we are going to start first in Reality Composer Pro, and we are going to add some components to our bubble entity. So you can already see there is a collision component here. Let's just add another component called physics body. So we add physics body, and it essentially adds like physics simulation properties in here. So if we simply add it, if we save our scene and run, before we do anything, let me remove our system, because now we're not using our system. So if we go and run this, so you can see that the bubbles we are creating, they're just falling down, and this is not what we want. The reason that is happening is when you go into your Reality Composer Pro project, your physics body component has affected by gravity enabled. So if you disable gravity, save the scene and run the project again, you can see that our bubbles are now not falling down. All right, so now let's go back into Reality Composer Pro and add another component called physics motion. So we are adding the physics motion component. The physics motion component allows us to set a linear velocity and angular velocity to our entity's physics body. So what we're going to do now is going to set its initial value to be something like 0.04. Let's try something. Make sure you save the scene, and let's try running the scene now. So you added the velocity, and you can see that there's something happening here. The bubbles are moving a little, but then they come to a stop. Why is this happening? So this is basically happening because we have a damping effect on our physics body. So to do this, to disable the damping effect, what we are going to do is we are going to go into our physics body here, and we are going to change our linear damping to 0. So once we do that, and we are going to save the scene, we'll go back and run it. So you can see now our bubbles are kind of freely floating and moving. Yeah, but the weird thing about our bubbles is they are all going in the same direction. Right? So how can we randomize their movement? So we already seen it, how we can do it. So what we need to do here is we are going to set our linear velocity for each bubble randomly when our clone gets created. So let's do that. We can always open these components in Reality Composer Pro and then set its value to be some random value. But I also want to show you how you can create these components in code. So what I'm going to do is delete these components. I also wanted to tell you that we are not using our bubble component right now. It was only being used for the system, so we don't need this. It's just there because we created the system previously. All right, so let's just see how we can add these components in code. We are going to create our physics body component and the physics motion component here. So let's do that. So let pb equals physics body component. We are going to set its linear damping to 0. We are also going to set is affected by gravity to false, because those are the things we did. And what we are going to do is we are going to assign it to our bubble clone entity, and we are doing the same for the physics motion component. And let me make this a var. Yeah, so we can do the same thing. Var pm equals physics motion component, and you say that it has this initializer which takes linear velocity, and it takes a SIMD3 float. So what we are going to do is we are going to create 3 variables, and then we are simply going to pass our 3 variables here. All right, so we created these, and then we are going to assign this as well. So let's run this. All right, so now our bubbles have random motion, and they're looking more fun now, and we can pop them. We can also go a little bit crazy about this. We can also increase the number of bubbles. So let's say instead of 20 we are doing 50. Now we have more bubbles. That is the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. In the next one, we'll be looking into the magical world of RealityKit portals. So please like and subscribe, and also hit the notification icon so you can get notified when the next one comes out. I will see you in the next one. Ciao.